were considered, but the majority of times, if you go back and look at the source covers month after month, you can usually line it up probably with that artist's album being released. And we just found that the cover of the magazine is basically what sells the magazine, especially when you're a newsstand magazine like the Source always was. You know, a lot of magazines have like subscriptions, you know, where people use, you know, they don't really have them anymore, but people would subscribe and get it mailed to your house. And we had some, but the majority was people going to the record store or to the newsstand once we got on the newsstands and buying it every month. And those sales really vary based on your cover and the way it's designed, who's on the cover, you know, all those sorts of things. So the cover was always the most valuable thing every month for our business was, you know, because you could see big fluctuations in the number of copies we would sell every month based on that cover.
Do you, looking back, do you think there were any mistakes with the cover? Like you should have had so-and-so instead of so-and-so? Like maybe Oz in '94. Do you think you ever made any mistakes, or do you think the covers always hit the nail on the head?
No, I'm sure. I haven't gone back and looked at it, you know, issue by issue, but of course we made mistakes. I mean, you know, there's albums that should have got 5 mics, like the Chronic, that got 4.5, and you know, there's lots of examples. So I'm sure there was sometimes we missed, and there were months where, you know, there were other choices, and we picked one, and the other artist, you know, probably could have deserved it as well. But you know, I think we were pretty good at that, which is why, you know, I mean, the Source became the #1 selling music magazine on newsstands in the world in the mid 1990s, late 1990s. I mean, we also Rolling Stone and of course Vibe and all the other hip hop urban magazines, but you know, all other music magazines of any kind, like by far, you know, exponentially. And you know, that was because we were good with our covers, and also because, you know, we were very strict with the record labels to make sure that we got the exclusive cover before anyone else did. And we had that kind of leverage because of how influential the Source was in the marketplace, where, you know, again, if you know, if the new DMX album was coming out, like, we would let Rough Riders and Def Jam know, okay, you know, we want the cover, but, you know, you can't do any covers with any other magazines until at least a month after we come out. And people, you know, pretty much went along with that because, you know, they wanted to cover the Source, and it was the most important, you know, place for any hip hop artist to be on the cover, more important than Rolling Stone in those days, and more important than, you know, Vibe and any other magazines over the years. So, but that was really important to our success, was being able to manage those relationships and make sure we got those exclusives, so that, you know, Double XL didn't come out with a cover of Jay-Z before we did and kind of take some of the, you know, the thunder away, because, you know, people wanted to read about the artists around the times their album dropped. You know, that's when there was a lot of, you know, music out, singles and everything, and they wanted to know what was going on and hear from them.
Approximately 3 years after you guys hit the newsstands, October 1991, Rap Pages hits the scene. What was your thoughts when you seen this magazine, and did you consider it any type of competition?
Well, at the time, I mean, we were still small, so, you know, Rap Pages was started by Larry Flint, the guy who created Hustler magazine, and he had Larry Flint Publishing. So Hustler was still being published back then, and he had a few other magazines. So, you know, it was a fairly significant magazine company to be competing with, and we're still, you know, these fresh out of college kids, you know, basically running this business. Um, but you know, generally, I don't think I know I wasn't really nervous because I just believed in what we were doing, and I knew that, you know, as each one of these magazines would come along, I mean, they might hire an editor that was sort of a hip hop person. You know, there were some talented editors at some of the other magazines over the years, but you know, the companies behind them weren't like ours. I mean, you know, you didn't have a Dave Mays that was the publisher and the owner of the company that was also, you know, really into hip hop and really of the culture. You know, Larry Flint, you know, he's just, you know, he's not, you know, he's not a guy that respected hip hop, loved hip hop. He was just starting it because he thought he could make some money. Somebody convinced him it was worth doing. So I always felt like that, you know, the fact that these other magazines were kind of run by companies that didn't really respect the music and the culture was ultimately going to be, you know, our advantage. You know, even if they hired good editors to try to make good content, you know, the source was successful because of everything we did, you know, from the business to the editorial, you know, like probably a regular magazine company would never have thought of building distribution in mom and pop record stores in every hood around the country. You know what I mean? Like they would have just tried to put it out in regular places where magazines were sold back then, and it probably wouldn't have done so well in the beginning. And you know, so the way that we did everything, it all kind of interrelated, and I always felt that was an advantage that, you know, anyone else that came into the market wasn't gonna be able to really compete with.
We got about 13 minutes before we get out of here. I want to get into the 1995 Source Awards.
Okay.
Can you take me back to that night? What was the atmosphere like? And did you sense any tensions with the Bad Boy and Daryl camp going into this show?
Well, no, that's a good question. I mean, and you know, there's been a lot of, in my opinion, misinformation and misreporting, you know, related to the 95 awards over the years. I mean, you know, there's sort of this general perception that like the awards is what started the East Coast, West Coast war, and that's the reason, you know, Tupac and Biggie got killed. And that's not really true. Um, you know, going into the awards, you know, Tupac is in jail at the time. Um, Me and nobody at that time knew that, you know, he was going to get out in a couple months and end up on death row. Nobody knew that he was, you know, Suge had been going to visit him or anything like that. Um, you know, Tupac, of course, as of '94, after the shooting at Quad Studios, you know, he had beef with Bad Boy and Biggie, and you know, he had been talking about that while he was locked up. Um, but Death Row and Bad Boy going into that '95 awards, they didn't have any drama. You know, there wasn't any known conflict between them at that point. Um, so you know, you had the background of East West tension for years in hip hop. That went back to the late '80s, early '90s. You know, where rappers who weren't from New York, you know, always felt disrespected by people in New York and on the East Coast, and they were. You know, there's many examples, like I was talking about earlier, where people in New York just didn't respect the artists and the music from other parts of the country. And you know, there's many examples of groups who had huge songs throughout the rest of the country, but you know, that New York and that Northeast corridor, you know, people weren't fucking with it. And so there was always a sort of tension between East and West and New York and really the rest of the country, really the Midwest and the South and the West, that had been going on for years. So, when during the Source Awards in 94, 95, I mean, just the challenge of bringing everybody from all these different camps, into one room at one time was a big challenge and a big accomplishment, but I was really the only person that had the relationships with everybody to be able to do that. There was nobody else in hip hop in those years that dealt with every label and every camp. So, I had the relationship with Suge Knight. I had a relationship with Jay Prince. I had a relationship with Luke. I had a relationship with Puff. All the players I knew and was able to, organize everybody to come together. And, I mean, nobody knew, of course, what Suge was going to do, but I think he was sort of provoked a little bit. I don't think that was just something that just came out of the blue. I mean, it was a very New York crowd. Obviously, we're in New York City. There's 5,000 people in the building, and we sold out probably 3,500, 4,000 tickets, and the other 1,000, 1,500 we gave away to the labels and the artists that were participating in the show. So the majority of your crowd is fans from the New York area that bought tickets. So, they're very pro New York. Death Row was at the top of the game in '95. I mean, they were selling millions of records. They, every one of their artists was, at the top of the charts. And, they opened the show with this incredible set. I mean, Suge Knight spent over $100,000 to build that set with the jail cells and all the explosions and all the stuff. I mean, that was a big, big deal for him to support me and the Source Awards, because no other label spent that kind of money. If you look at the show, the rest of the sets were all done sort of with the standard set that we built. Everybody performed on that standard set. Nobody else spent that kind of money to make their own custom set. And, that really made the show look much more professional on television. So I think, when they opened with that incredible show, that incredible with all their artists, that incredible performance, I think, there was a little bit of hating probably in the room against that. And, there were some things that were said. I'm not necessarily going to go into it now, but if you go back and you watch the show from the beginning, there were some things that were said before Suge got on stage that I believe kind of pissed him off a little bit. And he probably, felt a certain way and ended up saying what he said when he went up there. And, they were in there deep. I mean, Death Row, they had about 60, 70 guys in there. He flew a whole plane load of gang members from LA out for the awards. And, I gave him a lot of tickets because he was supporting the show. And, he told me he was flying a lot of people in. So I think he felt comfortable, even though it was a room full of New York folks saying what he said. And anyway, I mean, as far as there wasn't no fights that night. There was, there was the tension we've all seen. Snoop really diffused it a lot when he went up a few minutes later and said what he said. And, of course, you could see what I was saying about the hating with the Outkast thing. I mean, they deserve that shit. And again, that's another example. Like, we made sure to recognize somebody like Outkast when, other outlets, radio stations or other media outlets, wouldn't give them their proper due. But again, that room, there was just, it was a New York crowd. And so people were hating on them. And obviously they felt that energy, and Dre spoke on it. But regardless, even though it was tension, there was no fights, no problems that night. We finished the show up, and it was a huge success. The real drama started, a month and a half later, between Tupac getting out and joining death row and the shooting in Atlanta, where my man Jake, Big Jake, rest in peace, got shot and killed, you know, out at the Jermaine Dupri party. That's when the beef between Bad Boy and Death Row became really serious and violent. You know, before that, it wasn't really that serious. Um, you know, yeah, he made those comments that night, and you know, I'm sure Puff was upset about it as he expressed before, but you know, it wasn't like no real beef at that point.
Right.
So
We got about 5 minutes before we get out of here, and I just want to take the time to thank you for everything you've done for the culture.
appreciate that.
No doubt. You, without a doubt, have contributed to a success of many individuals. Do you think Dave Mays gets the credit he deserves?
um, well, I mean, a couple things. I mean, you know, I was always a very behind the scenes type of person, you know, unlike a lot of my contemporaries, you know, hip hop entrepreneurs in that era who, you know, were much more focused in promoting themselves, many of them, not all of them, but many of them. But I was always somebody that preferred to be behind the scenes, and I didn't want to put my face out there or put big things in a magazine every month. Dave Mays, publisher, you know, you don't see that in the source. You won't go back through the source and find my picture in there or any big things, you know, about me. So, you know, the people that knew, who were really in the industry and around the industry, really, they knew about Dave Mays, and they knew the influence, you know, and the importance and what I represented. And that's why I still have a lot of great relationships today and a lot of respect from the right people. But, you know, I think because of some of the controversies that happened with the source, the walkout in '94 that we sort of touched on but didn't really get into fully, you know, and then some of the controversies that happened later in the later years, you know, I think those things have overshadowed, unfortunately, a lot of the truth of the story and a lot of the realities of the accomplishments and the value of the source. And so, yeah, I probably haven't gotten the credit that I deserve, but, you know, it's coming. You know, right now I got Dave Mays Media, and I have a lot of plans for some new things. I'm going to be launching a new media platform probably later this year. Very excited about that. I think there's a huge void still in the marketplace and when it comes to hip hop and media. And like I mentioned briefly earlier, you know, my story is being developed, you know, and that'll be coming out in one or more forms in the near future. Looking at the big screen. So, you know, I think my story will get told in due time, and it's all good. You know what I mean? I'm focused on moving forward and things that I think I can contribute and what hip hop can really contribute, because in a lot of ways the mission of the source, you know, when I left, it sort of got derailed, and you know, hip hop in a lot of ways has suffered in the last 15 or 20 years. I mean, you know, in terms of it being a, you know, empowering kind of force and an empowering culture, it really, you know, whether it's social, economic, politically, hip hop should have, you know, had a much more significant impact on changing the world by this stage if it hadn't gotten off course. And there's a lot of that's another conversation. But
right, we may have to do a part 2 in the future. I got about 30 seconds. Like I said, we want to thank you. You gave us a great history lesson. You've changed the culture. You're very important, whether you know it or not. And just thank you for all the years of making us want more month after month before social media. And we'll definitely be in tune and on the lookout for what Dave Mays has coming next. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. That's Dave Mays. I'm the
Appreciate it, man. Keep doing what you're doing. Like I said, man, I like what you're doing, man. It's important.